Hello, this is Giorgio Lucas. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today I want to talk about flats and houses and which one of the two is better for a long-term investment or a short-term investment for that matter. So I want to go over advantages and disadvantages of each. So let's start immediately with flats. What are the advantages of buying a flat over a house for an investment? Well, number one, it's much cheaper. Prices given any area of the UK are much cheaper for flats than for houses. Also, flats tend to give you a higher yield than a house, so a better return on investment. And that's particularly true for one-bedroom flats. Third point is that there's no building maintenance to worry about. So if that roof goes, you don't have to take care of the roof. The company which looks after the building will do that for you. And if there ever is a major cost like that, you can share that between the other residents in the block of flats. All the other owners will pay their fair share as you will. So it's likely to be a lot less than a house. Also, flats now, you have a stronger demand in metro areas. So for example, like Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, London, etc. There's higher demand for flats than for houses, simply because you tend to have the young professionals there, a young family, perhaps just starting out. And there's a lot less demand now for houses than in those metro areas than there was before. Also with flats, if you've got the money, you can buy in bulk. So you could potentially from a developer buy 4 or 5 flats and get a heavy discount. That's not normally the case with a house. Now, the sixth point I want to make here about an advantage that the lifestyle trends are changing. As we become more single households, flats are reigning supreme over houses, and this is likely to continue in the future. So there are a lot of advantages of buying flats, but there are disadvantages as well, and I just want to briefly go over those as well. So with a flat, you can't add too much value as you can with a house. So there's no such thing as a loft conversion as there is in a house, but particularly if you buy off plan. You're not likely to be able to extend the space or do much with a flat. Granted, with an older flat, perhaps you can do a little bit more, but you tend to be able to do more with a house than you can with a flat. Also, with a flat, with certain flats, you have quite a high service charge. I've known here in London, service charges of up to £4,000 or £5,000 a year. That's a lot of money. So in 10 years, that could amount to easily between £30,000 and £50,000. So you've got to be aware of that when deciding what to go for. Ground rent is another thing, which there are some houses which are leasehold, but let's take it for now that most are not. And you have ground rents with flats as well, and there are some which can double in less than 10 years. You don't have to worry about that if you buy a house. So that's another disadvantage of buying a flat over a house. Now, another thing I find about flats is that there's a higher turnover of tenants. You often find in a flat, people come to the city, they want to stay for 6 to 12 months, they want to rent another flat, or they move to another city. So you don't get that longevity like you do in a house. So that's definitely a disadvantage of buying a flat over a house. Also, a very obvious one, there tends to be a smaller living space in a flat than a house. That's obvious. Just wanted to put it in there. And finally as well, with certain number of flats, it can be harder to obtain a mortgage simply because the lease may be short. In particular, if the lease is 80 years or less, you're going to have quite a bit of difficulty getting a mortgage for that flat. Also, if the flat is above a shop or it's a high-rise building, you may also have difficulty getting a mortgage provider for yourself. That said, if it is a short lease and you can get a mortgage and you're able to renew the lease, there are people who have made money on that. So that can be an advantage as well as a disadvantage with a short lease. But in general, short leases are a disadvantage. Now, let's come to houses. What are the advantages of houses? Obviously, they're a lot bigger than flats. Number two, I find that for houses, finance is readily available. So you're much more likely to get a mortgage deal straight away. Also with a house, you get longer term tenants because you tend to get families and families don't want to uproot so often as a young professional in a flat, they like to rent for 2-3 years a house. So that can stabilize your income for a while, rather than if you're having a flat continually looking for new tenants, and you're likely to have more voids if tenants keep changing. Also, with a house, there's much more likely to be capital growth, because, quite frankly, and let's take an example here in London, there are fewer houses, and the fewer houses you have, the more demand they have. It's inelastic demand, and that will drive up the price of a house in the future. I mean, already if you take certain areas of London where flats over the last 10-15 years might have increased by 70-80%, you'll find that often with houses it's a lot more than that. So for capital growth, I think it's better to buy a house than a flat. Although, having said, the yields, as I said before, the yields are lower for houses than they are for flats. So you've got to kind of do your calculations to see over the long term what's better. Right, next one. With a house, you can add value, because a lot of them you can add, as I was going back, loft extension, you can convert that into another bedroom. There's so much more you can do with a house. You can knock through the walls. You can create another bedroom. You can do that with a flat with more difficulty. Often a house has a little bit more jobs to do around, like rewiring, etc. So if you buy an older house and you're able to do it up, you can make a lot of money out of that, renting it or selling it on. Another thing I like about houses, there's no service charge. So you don't have to worry about paying service charge, ground rent, as you do with a flat. And I think that's quite a huge advantage of buying a house over a flat. Also, I think a house, it does tend to appeal across a larger proportion of society. So you're unlikely to have a family that wants to rent a flat. Whereas you may get the odd professional or professional couple that want to rent a house. So I think that's also, you tend to get a larger cross-section of society or households that want to rent a house over a flat. Now, let's come now to the disadvantages of buying a house. So, first one, obviously, it costs a hell of a lot more to buy a house than a flat. And appropriately, the stamp duty tends to be higher as well. Right, now with a house, you've got more maintenance. Again, I keep going back to, if that roof caves in, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. You can't share that cost with anybody. So it's going to be a lot more expensive to maintain a house than a flat. And also, there tends to be a little bit more wear and tear, simply because if you're renting the house out, you're likely to be renting it to a family with kids. And with kids, you're going to get a little bit more wear and tear than you are in a flat. Also, going back to the maintenance as well, it's not just the house itself. If the house has a big garden, there's likely to be a lot of maintenance work with the garden as well. So that's, as well as taking up your time, it can be quite expensive as well. And going back, I said houses do have lower yields than flats generally. And one other final point I want to make about a house is that if you do for a while decide to leave the house empty, it's a lot more likely to get vandalized than a flat that stays on the second, third floor, or even ground floor. So you've got to take that into account as well. A house can have a lot more headaches than a flat. So, having quickly gone over the advantages and disadvantages of buying a flat or a house for investment, you're going to ask me, which would you buy? A difficult one. There are a lot of factors. I mean, obviously there's your budget. How long are you going to keep this property for? I would say, what are your objectives? How much time have you got to look after either the flat or the house? So if you don't have so much time and you're not using an agent, it's probably best to buy a flat, because there's going to be less time for you spend on maintenance. There's going to be less maintenance costs as well. The flats will have a higher yield. But if you intend to buy this property for the next 20 years, you've got to take into account that houses, in particular in big cities, are likely to rise because they're going to become so scarce that the demand for them will go up. So perhaps if you're investing over 25 years, a house, the capital growth of a house may outweigh the annual rental yields. But again, it's up to you. You gotta plan. You gotta look at whichever city or town you are intending to rent this flat or house in or invest in, and have a look at what you can get as a yield and the likely appreciation over a number of years. Add them both up and see which is a better bet. So again, this is a bit of a cop out, so I'm just going to say it depends on your circumstances and what you want to do. But if you can leave comments below, if you think I've missed out any points, or you think that one is so obviously better than the other, please let me know. I'd really appreciate your comments. I'd also so much appreciate if you'd click the subscribe button and wait for my next video, which hopefully should come in the next couple of days. Again, it's been great to talk to you guys out there. I hope it's been of some benefit, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks ever so much.